Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. Job numbers. Marty Walsh, before he leaves as Secretary of Labor, came out with the job numbers today. An additional 311,000 jobs created in the month of February. That is 12.4 million jobs created since President Biden became, president. And you go, oh, well, you know that. No, those are jobs that have been created. People are back to work. People are off unemployment. When he took office, unemployment was 6.3%, now down to 3.6%, lowest level in my lifetime. I know, but Rick, there aren't as many people in the workforce anymore. You're right. A lot of people are retiring. People my age and older are going, the heck with this, not dealing with the poverty wages and the nonsense, finding our own way. And that's a good thing for younger workers, especially because it gives them better bargaining power to fight for better wages, hours, conditions. There's a lot of good going on and going to make employers make choices. Good idea. Good idea. Now that's this year, in the last 3-4 months, over 350,000 jobs per month in these months, which are historically the lower months. Now, the right wing losing their minds. It's the calm before the storm. They say this every month, that the recession's coming. We're working really hard to get that recession here with the help of the Fed, with the help of a Republican House. And, well, the moneyed interests who seem to want another recession. They seem to be dying for a recession, to get working people desperate again. Got to get them desperate so they'll take those crummy jobs again. Now, yesterday we talked about the president unfurling his $6.9 trillion budget, a budget that the White House claims is going to, over the next decade, going to save us nearly $3 trillion. Help us reduce that debt a little bit. Republicans haven't released their budget yet, but you see the early statements coming out from the House Freedom Caucus. It's like they're loading the gun and they're passing it around to make sure that it's loaded, so that they can get ready to shoot the hostage. Because this debt ceiling thing is, it's coming quickly, and you have all of the arrows pointing towards these handful of Republicans, these 20 House Freedom Caucus people. And it's more, look, there are more Republicans who want to hold this off and create this hostage situation so that they can get their pound of flesh. But I think it's just this core number in this caucus that really they really want to shoot the hostage. They really want pain and suffering. I go back to the collapse in 2008. And Republicans at the time were losing their mind because of the TARP funding that came out, and Obama, had some stimulus money that helped working people not lose absolutely everything. There were still millions of people who lost their homes, but there was some help. And I still remember my senator, Pat Toomey, saying that he would have preferred a much harder down, because then, like the phoenix, we would have risen out of the fire. And you go, wow, that's great mythology. But how many millions of people would have suffered, struggled? How many children would have gone to bed hungry? How many lives would have been ruined? They don't care about that. They're in the macro sense of, we got to care about the economy on this macro level. But when you get down to the baseline, you and me, us, we're disposable to these people. So when Rick Scott, one of the richest guys in the Senate, says, we want to sunset every piece of legislation, that pesky Social Security, that pesky Medicare, that pesky Medicaid, knowing that it's never going to come back once they sunset it. You kind of have to go, which side are they on? Now, this alternative world, because we live in this bipolar world, the jobs number came out, 311,000 created in February, 351,000 for the last 3 months, 12.4 million jobs since Biden has taken office. Went from having 18 million people on unemployment to less than 2 million people now. We're moving in a good direction. Rick Scott tweets out that here's what the mainstream media won't tell you about today's February jobs data. Higher unemployment rates. I'm going, no, that's not the higher unemployment rate. More layoffs on the way. I'm going, on the way? Yeah, I can say that, yeah, in my lifetime, there will be layoffs. And there will be more jobs. I can say in my lifetime, it's going to snow and it's going to rain and there will be unicorns dancing on rainbows. I can say lots of things. But I've got to take one of the richest senators in the Senate, his word. There will be more layoffs. I guarantee it. And if we keep letting him decide, absolutely there will be more layoffs. He says fewer people with full-time or part-time jobs. Yeah, again, we're getting older. The baby boomers are getting older. They're retiring at an alarmingly fast clip. And my generation, Gen X, we can't pick up the slack because we're not big enough. And the younger generation has been, screwed out of these jobs. And they're like, you know what? We're going to do our own thing. We're going to start our own businesses. But I do find it interesting that the Freedom Caucus, along with Senator Scott, have it in their head that we need to strangle government. My congressman, Scott Perry, who is the chairman of the Freedom Caucus, hell-bent on sending the country into recession. He's quoted saying, first, we need to shrink Washington, and we're going to do that by saving now, by ending, first of all, the president's $400 billion student loan bailout and rescinding all unobligated, unspent COVID funding. So we're going to go back and claw back all this stuff. We're going to screw those kids over, and they're going to go after the IRS money. They're going to go back and they're going to undo all of the stuff that would bring revenue in. They're going to do everything they can do to stop spending on anything having to do with climate change so that, disaster capitalism will prevail down the road. Because here's what I can guarantee you. In my lifetime, there will be disasters caused by our climate. And the capitalists will make lots of money off of it. It could happen tomorrow, could happen in a week, could happen in a month. It's going to happen. And people like Perry understand this. Got to wonder who's funding his campaign. But this is one of these moments. And this is where I just get into one of these kind of, which side are you on kind of moments. Because I had an interesting conversation with someone today who said, I love your show because it's not political on its face. You talk about issues that are important to working people, but politics has to come into it because everything's political, especially today. Things that we used to think of as common sense now are political footballs. Like children eating. I don't know how that became a political football, but in my lifetime it did. And I think it started with Reagan, who destroyed the school lunch programs that came out during the LBJ years. Mr. Ketchup is a vegetable. That started it, and now we've just exploded this to now people are dug into their camps, and we can't get things done for working people. And then they just throw us garbage, and we fight over the garbage. Stop and think about what Republicans are moving us towards. This debt ceiling thing, this is real. This is serious. I know. People love to say, no, we can default. We're the world's reserve currency. Yeah, if we default, the rest of the world comes with us. This is what the experts are telling me. We will start a global recession that's even worse than the inflation that we're seeing now. And look, that's good for Republicans. They love that right now because they're not the guy in the White House. They can point at the guy in the White House. It's all his fault. We did all of this stuff. We gridlocked, we delayed, we made all of this noise, this racket. It's his fault. We broke all the dishes and you wonder why nobody gets to eat dinner. This is where we are. And what's really kind of frustrating is that you can't get past that noise. because I think everybody wants things to get done. Take a look at the student loan thing. It's one of the first things on Scott Perry's mind. We're going to screw, because understand, we've coming out of this pandemic. For a couple of years, you've got these students who have been saddled with a lifetime of student loan debt, hundreds of thousands of dollars in some case, who haven't had to pay those loans, now going to have to restart payments. And they now see what life's like by having a couple extra dollars in their pockets. They've now made decisions maybe to buy a home that they're not going to be able to afford once those loan payments come back. What's that going to do to the overall economy, especially at a time when you're still raising interest rates and you're moving policy to strangle government? Because understand, government spending, kind of important to the economy. Government investment, kind of important to the economy. Government demand, really important to the economy. It's jobs. It's millions of jobs. And what I'm struggling to get is how people don't see the interconnectedness. How, it's like this debate over the rural versus the urban, and we're going to have a national divorce. Each need each other. There's a relationship there. I know we loved it to have dividing lines, and this is my line, and you stay on that side, I'll stay on mine. But each side does need each other. Some a little more than others. But that's how an entire country, a unified country should be. The fact that we're this split up, that someone's actually seriously in our government talking about a national divorce, basically an economic civil war, should make everybody angry. Instead, I get people all the time, yeah, we should do that so we can be around people who are just as dumb as we are. Crazy, crazy times. Something good, though. Let me finish up this segment on a good note. The House unanimously voted to declassify information around the origins of COVID-19. They sent the bill to the president. I am assuming he is going to sign it, and maybe we will get to the bottom. Now, understand, Republicans want to be this, Dr. Fauci, surreptitiously funded this Wuhan lab. It's not how that happened. And Democrats are going to want to figure out a way to blame it on something else. No, it was some. I still think what I thought from the beginning. There's the Wuhan coronavirus lab where the coronavirus was, because you're in a place where it's heavy, where there, from what I'm told, lots of activity with bats and all kinds of stuff that this stuff feeds in. Somehow it got loose into the wet markets. I'm going to say it was, my guess had always been it's by accident. But we'll see. I don't believe it was on purpose. But there's a conspiracy theory out there. And I've had people say, no, Rick, China's trying to kill off an entire generation of old people because they're old heavy. They don't have enough people to take care of all those old people. And I go, if that were true, again, this is one of those pushing back on common sense, with a little common sense. If that were true, would they have locked down the way they did? I mean, because they locked down in a much more draconian way than we did. You looked at their streets, it was ghost towns, and they were arresting people. So I'm going to struggle with that one. But I think we do need to have, just like January 6th, we do need to have a public forum. And oh yeah, we did, except the Republicans chose to abstain, basically saying, yeah, that's right. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Going to take a quick break, right back. Stick around. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So red state, blue state. Again, people calling for the national divorce. And what would a national divorce look like? If you could, conceivably, if you could do it. If you could really pull it off and you'd have, red states and blue, truly red states and blue states. Think about it. I look at Iowa. I look at Arkansas. I look at Tennessee. I look at Mississippi. You go through a number of these states that are going after child labor laws because we're going to make child labor great again. Going to put those kids back in the slaughterhouses, or we're going to put them back on the roofs of buildings so that they can do some roofing because they're light. If they fall, it won't be as hard when they hit the ground. And look, they heal much better than older people do. I'm being facetious. This is a joke, but not on the right. We're going to teach them some skills, get them to work. And you see the legislation that's being passed in these places. A tax on education, a tax on health care. Basically the wild, wild west where the wealthy, get wealthier and the working people, you're at someone's beck and call. Pushing more draconian anti-worker kind of laws. If you think right-to-work laws are bad, that lower wages and make health care and retirement security further off the table and make workplaces more unsafe, then right-to-work laws are for you. Because the studies are in and they are conclusive. Where they pass this right-to-work law that comes with no rights and no work, you end up with lower wages, less healthcare access, less retirement security, and much, much more dangerous workplaces. Now, again, this is what the right wants. And we've seen this play out in the legislation that they've moved. And that's just in the workplace. That's not talking about all the LGBTQ plus trans stuff or the drag shows, or that's not talking about any of that other stuff. That's not talking about the homogenization of ideology or religion. And as I've said before, once we decide we're a Christian country, the fun will be how crazy the crazies will go. How extreme will they take this ideology? Because I said from the beginning, before they were one of their wet dream list checked off to overturn Roe, I said eventually, Roe's not the end. Roe is the beginning. Then will come, Griswold and contraception, and then we'll, become, we're going to go after people who have premarital relations, and then, at-will divorces. That's going to go. We're going to go back 100 years, because that's what the puritanical right wants. They want power and control over half the population, the female half. And then you look at a blue state, and I look at Michigan. Michigan, good on you, man. Every blue state in the country should be paying attention to what they're doing. Not only did Michigan kill their right to work bill, they're moving that lame duck piece of garbage that Republicans rammed through back in 2012 in a lame duck like thieves in the night so that those people term limited out could get jobs on the other side. They moved to restore prevailing wage laws. That will help build local building trades and keep jobs local. That is fantastic. It's what we need to be doing, and also help local economies by having good wages reverberate through an economy. They also passed background checks, universal background checks for all gun purchases. The right's losing their mind. Also, The 1931 abortion ban, they repealed it, sent it to the governor's desk. This is what you do, Democrats. This is how you move. Not only this, the day after they repealed the no rights at work nonsense, they went back in and they are going to introduce a piece of legislation to provide refundable tax credits for people paying union dues, like it used to be before Republicans put that on their target list. Like it used to be before Donald Trump put it on his target list. And this is where I talk to my union brothers and sisters all the time and go, one of the big slaps in the face, again, Republicans slapped you in the face by taking that one little deduction. It's not much. It's the point of it. It's the same kind of thing that I think about when I think of Ronald Reagan. One of the things Reagan fought for was the tax unemployment benefits. Before Reagan was president, they didn't tax unemployment benefits because they understood it was an insurance program. It was an anti-poverty insurance program. It was to help you to get from one spot to another. Hit a little rough patch, lose your job. Here's a little bit of income to put food on the table, maybe help keep up a little bit with the bills until you get your next job. But Republicans have done their foolhardy best. Arkansas, another state, attacking unemployment benefits. They've done their foolhardy best to tear apart the social safety net. So for me, in looking at the difference between red state, blue state, we're talking desperation. We're talking, you've got freedom. You got freedom to go. You got freedom to work. You got the right to work. Now, again, no rights, no work. But you got that right. I'm not quite sure what right you got, but you've got it. But you're going to work for lower wages in worse conditions, without health and retirement security, and no voice, and you're disposable. But I guess the positive is you get to hate who you want. And that's the interesting part. You get to hate whoever you want. You want to hate the gays, you hate the gays. You want to hate those black folk over there, like the Dilbert guy, you can do it. You can do it. It's twisted, it's bizarre, but this is the world that they're trying to create for us. And the thing is, and I guess the good thing is the majority of people that I know, even the ones who did vote for Trump, don't want to live in that world. This is the thing that's interesting to me. I mean, Michigan was a red state for a while. They tried the bad policies. And what I love about Michigan is they went, that didn't work. That was bad for us. We need to go back to what we were doing before. It's really, really remarkable. So Democrats, pay attention to that. But everyone else, stop and think about what kind of a place do you want to live in? Do you want to live in a place where you have to abide by the majority opinion, where you've got to look a certain way and act a certain way and do a certain thing, and anybody finds out you're different, ostracized? Because it's kind of where we're heading. I look at the intolerance on the extreme right. It's troubling. Now, there's intolerance on the left too, don't get me wrong, but not nearly as well organized, not nearly as well oiled of a machine, and not winning. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1925. That was the day the first civil lawsuit for damages was filed on behalf of the Radium Girls. During the 1910s and 20s, radium was all the rage. It was considered a medical cure-all for everything from blindness to asthma. The U.S. Radium Corporation employed hundreds of young women in New Jersey and Illinois to paint radium onto watch dials and military instruments. Women workers were instructed to shape the paintbrushes to a fine point with their lips in order to paint the numbers onto the watch faces. They soon fell ill. Many complained of losing scores of teeth and shattered and rotting jaws. The death toll began to rise. U.S. Radium and other related companies initially tried to smear the women as suffering from syphilis. Catherine Wiley of the New Jersey Consumers League began investigating the use of radium by dial painters. She was also concerned about how emissions affected the community surrounding the plant. Wiley enlisted the help of Alice Hamilton, mother of industrial medicine and occupational toxicology. The chief medical examiner of Essex County determined the women suffered from radium exposure. They were exhaling radon gas. The findings were earth-shattering for the industry. Case proceedings were highly publicized in the press. Extremely frail and sick young women appeared in court, barely able to walk or testify. The company agreed to settle the case. $10,000 for each woman, a $400 a year pension, and medical care. Women at the Ottawa plant suffered for years before finally learning the truth about their job-related illnesses. The case impacted fields related to occupational safety and health. It also fundamentally broadened scientific understanding of radioactive elements. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Many of today's right-wing governors and state legislators have a problem by constantly pushing an extremist ideological agenda of nonsense about nutty conspiracy theories while imposing autocratic laws to ban everything from voting to library books. They've become widely ridiculed as some combo of kooky, clownish, and embarrassingly incompetent. That's why it's significant that Missouri's GOP lawmakers have not only recognized their image problem, but have actually made an effort to demonstrate that they are serious-minded public officials concerned about their professionalism. Namely, the State House of Representatives has adopted a dress code. Seriously. Specifically, the attire mandate addresses the pressing state issue of female lawmakers who come to work dressed normally but without jackets. Disapproving legislative leaders clucked that this fashion faux pas was undermining the public's respect for them. But now, says GOP Representative Ann Kelly, sponsor of the new code, quote, "It has been fixed." Henceforth, all women legislators in the Show Me state must wear blazers or cardigans in order to, as Kelly explained, always maintain a formal and professional atmosphere in the House. Professional? Excuse me, but these far-right state legislatures totter between being goofy policy forums and carnival sideshows. The only proper attire for many of these so-called legislative leaders would be straitjackets. One lawmaker even claimed that the code was about protecting freedom. The clothing mandate, she explained, eliminates the possibility that the state will be the clothing police. This is Jim Hightower saying, I'm thinking of moving to Missouri. It must be wonderful to live in a state where the government has already fixed all the big problems people really care about, letting the legislative body focus on properly clothing its women members.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, not surprising, if you watched the trial of Larry Householder, the former Ohio Speaker of the House, and former Ohio State GOP Chairman Matt Borges, convicted Thursday in federal court of participating in a pay-to-play scheme, a little bribery, a little greasing the palm. And you expect a little bit of that, but $60 million, $61 million actually, for this scheme to bail out this energy company, $61 million. Each of them could face up to 20 years in jail. They're obviously going to appeal because I love the defense. That's $61 million in bribes. It's because of Citizen United. It's political speech. I love that argument. And here to share some thoughts on how corrupt Ohio has become, one of the most corrupt states in the country, and Householder right there at the top of the list. I've asked our good friend Bob Ney, former Ohio congressman and political analyst, to come share some thoughts. Bob, thanks for taking time for us. I think I lost Bob.
There we go. Thank you.
I think Bob fell asleep. How we doing, buddy? I think we lost
I'm sorry,
him.
what's that?
I think we lost him again.
Are you there?
Yeah, here we go. You there?
Okay. Yeah,
all right.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So, brought to you by Verizon. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
So, householder, your state corrupt thoughts?
Well, there's some interesting issues also to this that have not really been brought up to the surface much, even by the media. Of course, Householder's been convicted. Matt Borges, former chairman of the Republican Party, convicted. 2 people pled on the issue, and one of the lobbyists committed suicide. I think it was last year.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about this is, beyond the aspect of the dark money, which I'll talk about in a second here, no one from the corporation, no one was charged.
And why not?
They did some type of deal where they avoided criminal charges if they, blah, 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 offered testimony. But then you have Householder's main guy that ran his system, Longstreth, who, also testified against Householder and, turned state's evidence. But he'll get some type of charge. But the corporation itself that funneled through $61 million, not one person that I know of. There was a regulator that got charged. The corporation didn't get charged. I mean, how does that happen? It's beyond me. Now, the issue of the money, what Householder did, and he was thrown out of the legislature. He was expelled because he wouldn't quit. And so what he did, though, is he took the money and then he used it to get people elected who then voted for him for speaker. Now, and this won't sound very good what I'm about to say, Rick, that in itself would not technically probably be something you could get convicted of. You take money and you use it, and you get people elected, and they like you, and then they elect you speaker.
Sure. Yeah, nobody knows where that. As long as the people who you got elected didn't know where the money was coming from, and there was a quid pro quo
Correct.
over taking First Energy's money to get you elected,
Correct.
and you're going to do this for First Energy. There's no crime there, I don't think.
Correct. Now, later, of course, they did a bill which, greased First Energy's system there and let them out of a lot of regulations and problems and the nuke plant they had and everything like that. But Householder also used the money for a condominium in Florida and paying off a credit card and things like that. So when that kicked in, obviously, that added more fuel to the fire of this being, a bribe and also of money used illicitly. And First Energy would have known, where that money went. It's dark money. And there's these organizations, they've been around a while. And of course, Citizen United's, decision with the Supreme Court. But there's these dark money groups of 501c3s, 501c4s, and so they're around the country. And when we had talked about campaign finance reform, John McCain focused on soft money, which, could come from the businesses of the unions at the time. But nobody, even back then when we raised the issue, wanted to talk about the dark money. This is money you don't have to tell where it's coming from. Now, the mechanisms to feed Householder and his people, and they got big. The one lobbyist made, I think, $2 million, but that mechanism was hidden. But the actual dark money itself was going through systems that you didn't have to tell.
But, the thing is, and maybe you can help me here, isn't that basically how the right wing built their state policy network? I mean, isn't this the think tank model? And, all of those have offshoots to do all of these other things, Americans for Prosperity and Freedom Works and all these kind of spun out of those, then go out and do this hit political work?
Well, they did. I mean, they mastered it. And on the other side, there's people that have, groups. George
there's some
Soros
on the left too, sure.
Oh yeah, George Soros, did these the 501. I think he had a 501c3, and then Rove saw Karl Rove, Bush's guy saw, wow, these PACs, and they create these groups, and then yes, Freedom Works, and all of these groups, and probably what happened, I think, is the right perfected the process.
Oh, absolutely, they did.
Yeah, they did. And you throw in Citizens United, And, I just think it all ought to just be transparent. And then, I got in trouble with the lobbyists, but to be frank about it, we listed, for example, the trip, that I took, we listed it was under funded in the listing. I understand that, but as far as all the the dark money, there was no dark money particularly involved in that. In those cases, Abramoff threw the money all around it. It was listed. So just think, if Abramoff did things that were illicit and illegal, just think about the dark money side of it, of what you don't know about.
Yeah. No, this is the bigger part of this. Yeah, somebody got caught with their hand in the till. Because as I was looking at this, I'm going, okay, so First Energy is attempting to lobby the Ohio legislature to bail them out. A bunch of corporations do this. This is what. There's a whole cottage industry of K Street is full with this stuff. Why was this different? I guess it keeps coming back to that for me. Why was this bribery different? Because you look at lobbying as a whole, it seems like a lot of bribery.
Well, again, I pointed out in the beginning of our conversation, and again, I know it sounds not good. I know it sounds dirty. I know this, but if in fact Householder had not, they caught him on some other things, trying to offer bribes for inside information, but if Householder had not utilized money for himself, then the really bigger picture nasty side of this, and I say that because, look, Householder funneled some money, fixed up a condo in Florida and stuff, and let me call that trite, and I'll tell you why. That is trite. It's illegal, but it's trite compared to what happened to the taxpayers of Ohio bailing out this huge corporation and a law to come in to let them out of everything in the regulatory process, all right? And that's even worse, but that in itself probably would not have gotten to a jury trial if it weren't for the personal money they used. It's just as bad what they did with the money for First Energy and using it to pass a bill, but I hate to say it, probably wouldn't on its own have led justice to be able to convict them.
Yeah. So, but if you stop and look at it purely as a return on investment, $60 million sounds like a lot of money. But when you look at the fact that they were seeking a $1.3 billion state bailout for their two failing nuclear plants, $60 million is a drop in the bucket.
Right. And that's the way the corporation looked at it, and they just kept funneling the money and throwing the money out there, and then they created these accounts that received the money, and none of them. Look, this is probably why the corporation, nobody was convicted. They don't have to report those things,
right,
because if they had to actually report it and it was ironclad, they would all be in prison. They didn't. They gave the money, and it was up to somebody else to say where it was going.
So Householder falls on the sword here, or this. They say they're going to appeal. They're arguing on a First Citizens United basis. Who knows where this goes? Does this garner any national attention? Is this something that nationally should be front and center? Because is this just Ohio is just a criminal state? They're all corrupt there. It is what it is for Ohio, but the rest of the country will be fine. Is this something that nationally we should be looking at?
Well, it should be, but I don't think it will. There's going to have to be some big national deal come down sometime that affects, I guess, more states before people react. For example, the heat came up about members of Congress and their stocks. That affected a bunch of people,
right,
a lot of people in the Congress. So, they wanted to then do something about it. This is like Ohio, and now that there's been a conviction and he was thrown out as speaker, you know how that runs. Okay, it's all over with. It's done. They got the bad guy. They put him in jail, and it's done. If you look at the big picture of this, though, this one is a textbook case example of $61 million that was used to elect one individual as a speaker to then shepherd through legislation for that very same corporation. And, if the pharmaceutical industry, for example, is giving probably even more money, and they're doing it to keep certain people in power at a higher level, of whoever, whatever party, then that's just the same type of case example as what happened in Ohio.
Yeah. Now, I look at this, and again, I look at the bailout. I look at the a company getting bailed out, the deregulation, all the stuff that went along with this. This is generally in Republicans' wheelhouse to begin with. Why did they have to bribe these guys to get what they were going to get anyway? So, it was part of the trial. Were these bribes solicited? Was this, just the normal course of lobbying, or don't we know?
No, I think we know. Anybody that knows, Householder, I've known him forever. Anybody that knows Householder knows that he has a strong arm. He and I got into it years back. He wanted a certain amount of contributions. I wouldn't do it. And if you look at the district, they decimated the eastern Democratic portion of my district, decimated it, took it all away from me. And the only reason I had a thumbnail of my home in the district was because the Senate put it back in. He even took my home out when he got mad at me. So he has a history of, and I'm not wishing anybody, bad harm or whatever comes to them. But I'm just saying, anybody that knows him knows he had a history, and I think the corporation knew unless he was in charge, unless he became the speaker, they weren't going to get what they wanted. Yeah. So therefore, they had to go along with it, because in order for him to get to be speaker, he needed to spend the money out there, and this was the quick way to spend it. Look, normally people in public office that want to be speaker of Ohio legislature or any state legislature or national, they raise money, they go in and raise money for candidates, they give money to candidates. That happens all the time. And this was the, quote, easy way out. You didn't have to do a bunch of fundraisers. You just make one phone call to First Energy, give me $61 million, spread the $61 million around, elect who you want, they elect the speaker, First Energy gets what it wants. I mean, this is a connect your dots.
The thing I found interesting is Borges, the former state chair of the Republican Party. He could have came to an agreement, a deal, got 6 months and testified. Now he's facing 20 years. But he says he doesn't regret his decision. I don't know. I think I'd be regretting that decision.
Well, having been through this, where I was looking at a trial and would need to raise $3.2 million, number one, to go to trial. Number two, looking at the fact that when you go to trial, you don't end up with one or two indictments. You end up with 50, 60, 70 indictments, And if you lose on one, ask Rod Blagojevich of Illinois, you can beat the government 62 times. You lose the 63rd time. Guess what? You're looking at 10 years. And I think Borges didn't take the stand, Householder did, but I think with Matt Borges, he thought that he wasn't going to be so wrapped up in this. He was a side thing this. But the problem he had is he offered a check to get inside information to a Republican who then turned state's evidence and said, yes, he did that. So, he was associated just enough with Householder to have this to have the tag-along effect, I guess you would call it. To be frank about it, Borges wasn't the main mastermind, of these things, but he was a player with Householder to get what Householder wanted done.
Yeah. As my mother always said, you're judged by the company you keep.
Yeah.
So if that's the company you're keeping, well, oops. So
that's right.
Do we think he gets 20 years? I mean, do you think he sees 20 years?
It's hard to say, but I would, I did a plea deal for 18 months. The judge gave me 30 months. They didn't do a plea deal. When you go into court and you lose, you're in worse shape. I mean, my gut, and who knows what will happen, my gut tells me 10 years. I mean, that's what my gut tells me.
And some restitution, maybe? Some of that, claw back some of the ill-gotten gains?
Yes, that's the other thing. In my case, because I didn't, take anything, steal anything, I didn't have restitution. I had a fine, for the activity. But in their case, I mean, there could be restitution because, of the money that was used for personal use. There could be restitution, yes.
Well, let's hope he's left penniless and insane. Because look, this kind of violation of the public trust, at some point, there's got to be someone who's the poster child of "don't do it." I mean, if this is ever going to change, and we're ever going to have faith in the leaders that we elect to actually represent us and not these big moneyed interests, I don't know how you get away from that. I don't know how you turn this tide, because clearly we can't legislate it.
Well, and this one, Rick, as you know, affected 11 million people. I mean, it affected the entire state. So if there's ever a casebook example, they call this the largest, scandal in Ohio's history. But beyond even that, I mean, it's a case of a special interest involved with a lawmaker and lawmakers that ended up affecting, the entire citizenry of the state.
Yeah.
And, this is something that could be done, like this could be done nationally, with pharmaceuticals or the electric grids or, whatever. There could be something like this that could happen.
No, and I think most people think, Bob, that this happens every day, that this kind of stuff is what our elected leaders are doing every day, that this guy just got caught. He just maybe got his arm a little too far into the cookie jar. But I know people who think the entire system's corrupt, wrought with corporate cash, where we should have legislators wearing, NASCAR jackets.
Well, the thing about this is, and I don't know about, the broad-based side of the country, but I do know from being in D.C., there's extremely powerful interests. And as long as there's dark money, as long as it's out there, as long as you don't know who's giving and where it's going, yes, this could be happening every single day all over the country. The way, and let's say Ohio cleans it up and says, yep, everything, you put a dime in, you show it. But it really needs to be done nationally. And as we argued with John McCain and Feingold about their campaign finance bill, at the time, we brought up the issue of transparency. You put a dime in, you know who puts it in, and you know where it goes.
So last question I've got for you. You helped write the Help America Vote Act. You're kind of in, this is kind of your wheelhouse. How do we make this more transparent? How do we make it that this kind of stuff doesn't happen, especially not at this scale?
It's an easy law to write. And like I said, at the time, McCain was angry with me because he wanted to do away with soft money. And within the Democrat and Republican side, a lot of people really didn't want to at that time. But we did start to embark on discussion of issues about, transparency. And I think that this could be, I think this could be solved by simply saying, federally, that any PAC, any 501c3, any organization that, in fact, it expends any amount of money for any purpose, within the political system and the PACs, et cetera, have to account for who gives and where it goes. You can't stop it by saying you can't give, because that'll go to the court. But you can surely show where it goes. And let me tell you something. When this whole thing started, if people would have known, I just saw $10 million went from First Energy to Householders PAC, this may have been stopped.
Yeah, that would have raised eyebrows. No,
it would have.
Something we should be moving forward, pushing for. But Bob, I appreciate the time. As always, excellent information.
Thank you, Rick.
Good stuff. Our good friend Bob Ney. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1968. That was the day that farm labor activist Cesar Chavez broke a 25-day fast. He fasted as a sign of commitment to nonviolence during the struggle for farm workers in Delano, California, to gain fair wages and safe working conditions. During the fast, he only drank water. He broke the fast with a ceremonial mass in Delano. Presidential candidate Robert Kennedy was in attendance. At the Mass, Chavez was too weak to give a speech, so he gave his written words to Reverend James Drake to share with those in attendance. He wrote, "We are gathered here today not so much to observe the end of the fast, but because we are a family bound together in common struggle for justice. We are a union family celebrating our unity and the nonviolent nature of our movement. The fast has had different meanings for different people. Some of you may still wonder about its meaning and importance. It was not intended as a pressure against any growers. For that reason, we have suspended negotiations and arbitration proceedings and relaxed the militant picketing and boycotting of the strike during this period. I undertook the fast because my heart was filled with grief and pain for the suffering of the farm workers. The fast was first for me and then for all of us in this union. It was a fast for nonviolence and a call for sacrifice." Chavez engaged in 2 more long fasts during his life as an activist. He fasted in 1972 for 24 days. And in 1988, at the age of 61, he fasted for 36 days to highlight the harmful effects of pesticides on farm workers and their children. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It all comes back down to the money. It's the money, and the lack of transparency is the biggest part of all this. I've been saying for years the right has done a masterful job of creating all of these wonderfully named, euphemistically named think tanks, Americans for Dogs and Puppies and moms who love apple pie, who do all of this political work. And there's a ton of cash that goes flowing through those, the dark money stuff that and then ends up, fueling a whole political arm of mostly the Republican Party. The Democrats have some, a little bit, but not nearly the kind of coordinated messaging and networking that comes out on the right. It's just not there. The right-wing money has built the most impressive infrastructure that you could imagine. A propaganda machine second to none, really. I mean, it takes from the national level and filters down to the state level, then filters down to the county level, then filters down to the municipal level with incredible accuracy. And it's amazing, what they've been able to accomplish. You have to give credit where credit is due. You really do. And not only do they come up with bad ideas, they message these bad ideas where, this sounds reasonable. Like tax cuts for the very wealthy. We'll give the very wealthy everything that they could want. Give the boss everything. Give them all the power, deregulate, get rid of those labor laws, tax cuts out the wazoo, and something, the benevolence, the good-hearted nature of these folks will trickle down on us. And, we knew that was BS when they were trying to sell it to us. And we've seen over the last 40, 50 years, it's lived out to be the total bunk that we knew it was going to be. But they keep selling it. They keep pushing it. Biden had the audacity to say we need to raise taxes on rich people. And wow, poor people went crazy. How dare you tax rich people? It's, I guess, like a form of Stockholm syndrome, maybe. Maybe it's we've heard it so much that we kind of bought it. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com.
Do you have the ability to produce more oil?
We do, but
oil companies plan to keep prices high and supplies low. Plastic pollution in the ocean is doubling every 6 years. Plus,
you're going the wrong way! What? You're going the wrong way!
CO2 emissions reached record levels in 2022.
All of those wrong way stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
We want oil, gasoline, natural gas because it's cheaper, better, and much more powerful. It's April Fool's Day.
Actually, it's March, but we know who the fool is. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, it does sound like we got a lot of stories about going the wrong way here today.
Yes, unfortunately, we do. Emissions of carbon dioxide reached a record high in 2022, according to the International Energy Agency, with countries emitting more carbon dioxide in the last year than in any other year on record dating back to 1900. It's due to a rebound in air travel from the pandemic and countries increasing use of coal for electricity amid Russia's invasion of Ukraine, disrupting global energy supplies. Annual CO2 emissions remain below pre-pandemic levels, so that's good, and the rise of wind and solar energy plus electric vehicles have helped offset the increase in fossil fuel pollution.
So the emissions that are happening now are theoretically only temporary?
Define temporary.
I'd rather not.
In other news, a new peer-reviewed study finds that methane emissions from agriculture could add nearly 1 degree Celsius of warming to the climate by 2100, even if fossil fuel use is drastically reduced.
Also not good.
Researchers calculated emissions of potent climate-warming methane from the production of meat, dairy, and rice, and warned that without changes to curb methane in the food system, the world is likely to overshoot temperature targets in the Paris Climate Agreement. Heads up, U.S. retail gasoline prices are on the rise again and are likely to go even higher in coming months because the oil industry is reluctant to increase production while it's pulling in record profits.
Of course.
At an energy conference in Texas this week, the CEO of Occidental Petroleum, Vicki Hollub, told CNBC that they are focused on buying back shares and won't increase production to lower prices on American families.
Why not use more of that money to drill more wells, to pump more oil, to theoretically bring down prices?
Well, actually, I think prices are in a good place right now.
I bet you do.
And I think gas prices at the pump are not so bad at this price. So I think it's optimum.
For you, it's optimal. For everyone else, it's terrible, lady.
And thanks in part to fossil fuels, there are now 21,000 pieces of plastic pollution in the ocean for every person on Earth. According to a major study out this week, humans have dumped dramatically more plastic pollution into the ocean than previously estimated. The researchers found that human plastic pollution has been doubling about every 6 years, and they found a rapid rise in tiny microplastic pollution since 2005.
Well, that's okay. With all the oil companies making record profits, I'm sure they'll be able to spend some of that money to clean up the mess that they made in the oceans, right?
The researchers warned that cleaning up and recycling plastic waste will not be enough, and they called for manufacturers to be held responsible for the products they create, saying, quote, "It's time to address the plastic problem at the source."
Yes, please.
But some good news.
Finally.
Australia, for the first time in its history, has rejected an open-pit coal mine. This one was set to be near the Great Barrier Reef. Last month, Australia's Environment Minister rejected an application for the massive coal mine, citing the risk of water pollution and irreversible damage to the reef. The Biden administration Environmental Protection Agency this week proposed tighter limits on wastewater pollution from coal-burning power plants, restoring and tightening Obama-era clean water standards that were rolled back by the Trump administration. Finally, yes, it is still a fact that electric vehicles really are far cleaner than gasoline-powered cars, and that's even when factoring in the need to increase mining for battery production. A new analysis by Quartz, compiled from the most recent data, finds that even after factoring in emissions from mining for materials required for EV batteries and the manufacturing process, the direct emissions from driving a typical internal combustion engine passenger car over its lifetime still far outstrips the total life cycle emissions of a typical EV by a factor of 4.
Well, you'd think Republicans would finally get that now that Elon Musk is apparently on their side, but message hasn't gotten to Donald Trump yet, apparently, so we keep paying at the pump. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I didn't know it was Kimberly Guilfoyle's birthday. And at her birthday party, Donald Trump, complained about the rigged election. Happy birthday. They rigged the election. They stole the election from me. They used COVID to cheat. He said, would you want that guy coming to your birthday party? I mean, at some point, then you go, you're a downer. Go away. Go in the corner and brood. Go in the closet and yell at yourself. Here's a mirror. Tell to someone who really actually cares, because none of us, I don't know, very, very strange stuff. But here's the thing. I mean, as more and more comes out of this Dominion lawsuit, as more and more we find out about Fox News and what they really think of the audience, I'm hoping that light bulbs will go on. I'm hoping that epiphanies will be had. And maybe we could, I don't know, start talking to each other again. And that's why I've asked my good friend Craig Harrington to come talk with us. Craig is the research director over at Media Matters for America. MediaMatters.org, the website. They've got a new initiative popping up, focusing on what Fox News knew and what they did with what they knew. The new campaign is foxnew.com. Craig, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So walk me through the foxnew.com website and what you guys are working on.
Sure. So the sort of long story short is that Media Matters has been at the spearhead, been acting as the spearhead of a campaign called Drop Fox for a number of years, where we have been encouraging cable providers, as well as advertisers who buy packages on cable networks, to drop Fox from their advertising buys and to drop Fox from their network lineups. And what we're doing now with this new initiative, Fox New, that's KNEW, foxnew.com, is we're trying to educate the public in the run-up to a couple of very important contract renegotiations that Fox is doing with their cable providers. We're trying to educate the public about the sort of tax that all of us are paying, all of us who subscribe to any cable service or to DirecTV. We're paying a premium to carry Fox on our cable packages, even though 99% of cable news viewers don't watch Fox News. And that premium is going to supporting Fox's political operations and its propaganda initiatives. And the most important of these that's in the news today is Fox's defamation initiative against Dominion voting systems and Fox's propagation of the big lie in the wake of the 2020 election. Fox News went all in on election lies and conspiracy theories in the wake of Donald Trump's failed re-election bid in 2020. They promoted conspiracy theories on air hundreds of times that they knew were false when they promoted them. They specifically defamed two companies by name, Dominion Voting Systems and Smartmatic, both of whom are suing Fox right now in multi-billion-dollar lawsuits for reputational damage and for actual damages that they received as a result of Fox attacking them specifically hundreds of times over the course of months in the wake of the 2020 election. Fox knew that they were telling their audience lies. They knew that they were hosting liars and conspiracy theorists on their air. And many of their own hosts and guests, paid contributors, network personnel, employees whose checks are ostensibly signed by Rupert Murdoch himself, employees of the network were not just allowing lies to be broadcast on their air, but they were often peddling them, pushing them, parroting them themselves. And what we are trying to expose to the public is that Fox knew this was a lie. They knew that they were engaging in, frankly, a defamation campaign against these businesses and in fraud against their viewing public. And what we think is that the people who are paying Fox's bills through their cable subscriptions and people who are paying Fox's bills through their advertising purchases, they need to know what they're actually supporting, which is not a news organization, but it is a partisan propaganda outlet. And we don't say that lightly, And we don't say that pejoratively. It is actually definitively true. Fox is not a news outlet. And part of the reason they put news in the name is because if you were to watch Fox, if it were called Bravo, you wouldn't watch any programming that came out of that channel, whatever number it is on your cable box, whatever number it is on the dial. You would not think that is news. You would think it was comedy or satire. You'd think it was a skit. You would think it was entertainment, but you would not think it was news. And you wouldn't think that it has the protections, the very broad protections we afford the news under the First Amendment. You'd think it was responsible to a different standard. And that's a standard we want Fox to be held accountable to.
Yeah, no, I mean, what's interesting is the tagline, fair and balanced. They're anything but fair or balanced. But, even Tucker Carlson in the lawsuit said they're not news, they're entertainment. And that's kind of telling, I guess, in a certain way. But I look at some of these emails and some of these texts that have been put out, and the communications back and forth behind the scenes, where, as you've said, they knew what they were doing. And I look at the Rupert Murdoch testimony where it said it's not about red or blue, it's about green. At the end of the day, our democracy, our country, the fair and balanced, the logo, all it had to do was it was about money, all about money.
Yeah, and it's one thing, you could be the CEO of CBS, Les Moonves, during the 2016 election, very famously said that he didn't think Donald Trump was good for America or good for democracy, but he was good for CBS. And that was seen as, frankly, a very craven thing to say, a very cynical business perspective. But it was true that what Donald Trump brought, his sort of reshaping of politics, made a lot of people buy subscriptions to newspapers. It made a lot of people turn on the TV. It made a lot of people watch the news. And it did make the news more profitable. But the difference is that when CBS Evening News went on air, when Scott Pelley was anchoring, when Norah O'Donnell was doing stand-ups from the White House, when their reporters or their contributors were providing commentary for their audience, for their millions of people who tune in every night and every morning to watch CBS for the news, they were held to a standard where what they were reporting was factually true, or at the very least, that they believed it was true when it went on air. They had done the due diligence. They had done the work. What we know from Fox and what Media Matters has been detailing for now almost 20 years, and what we know now in minute and intimate detail through these internal communications that have been released by Dominion as part of their defamation lawsuit, we know that Fox did not do any diligence. Fox did not do any fact-checking. Fox did not do anything that news operations do to vet the information that it was putting out there to its roughly 3 or so million daily viewers. And since they were intentionally misleading that audience, since they were knowingly misleading that audience, they have to be held to a standard. And the standard for defamation, the standard that they are trying to defeat in this case against Dominion, and the other case against Smartmatic, and in myriad defamation cases that they may or may not face in civil litigation going forward, or that they're currently dealing with or suppressing in some other way. The standard for proving defamation against a news organization is extremely high, and it ought to be high. The New York Times shouldn't be thrown in jail for getting a story wrong if they followed the methodology correctly. The difference between the New York Times and Fox News is that the New York Times is trying to do it right. And Fox is not. And
they've admitted it. I mean, you've literally got the back and forth between their 3 biggest stars saying, this is bad for our stock.
They're putting the word news in scare quotes when they're talking about the supposed journalists, the real news side. They put it in quotes. They say news. Even the opinion makers at Fox, they think that the news department at Fox is a joke. They realize that it is the sort of sheep's clothing for the propaganda apparatus that is Fox. The reason they call it news, CNN doesn't call itself news. CNN is an acronym. It used to mean cable news network, but no one thinks about that. No one thinks about what MSNBC means. But Fox News, it puts it right in the name, puts it right in front of you, because they know if they didn't lie to you right at the outset, you would never, ever believe that what you're watching was news. It's more akin to, it's closer to the National Enquirer than it is to the New York Times.
Wow.
And people are now beginning to realize that. And I don't say National Enquirer lightly. Literally, one of the sources for one of Fox's major news hosts, one of their stars for Fox Business Network, and one of their weekend stars is Maria Bartiromo. And one of the emails that we saw was an email from a woman who claimed that she has visions in her dream. She sleepwalks into like an astral plane, and the wind tells her that she's a ghost, and she knows not to believe the wind. She signed her email Mars, and she included all of these detailed conspiracy theories about how Dominion voting machines were stealing the election results in key swing states and changing votes. Maria Bartiromo forwarded that to her producers. She ran with that on her program. The mouthpiece for that wild conspiracy theory, like a chain email that you'd get from your grandmother. The mouthpiece for that was Sidney Powell, who was an attorney working for the Trump campaign at the time, or at least working as aligned with the Trump campaign at the time, trying to overturn the election results in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Arizona and in Georgia. Maria Bartiromo ran with something that was lower quality than the chain emails that we used to get from our great aunts in the early days of the internet.
But the thing is you would think this is all a joke if they didn't have so much outweighed power, because you look at the legislatures across this country. I mean, my state senator, my son called me and said, I'm going to meet our state senator. I'm going, I wouldn't be excited. He's an election denier. He's one of the guys who wanted to overturn our election because he believes Trump won the election here. Because of what comes out of fake news.
Yeah.
So do you think that there's going to be that moment of epiphany? Because look, I look at what Tucker Carlson has done with the January 6th video. He told us, I looked at 40,000 hours and we got this minute of people walking between ropes and the people mulling around taking pictures of each other. I like what the one guy said. It's kind of like on the morning of 9/11, taking pictures before the planes crashed, saying it's such a beautiful day. There was
here's Muhammad Atta checking in at Boston Logan Airport. That guy's not a terrorist.
Yeah, he's walking between the ropes.
Yeah,
I mean, this is the kind of insanity that people are buying, and the number of emails I'm getting from people going, the government's covering all this up. Those people in jail are now, political prisoners and martyrs, and this Fox News led, right wing led propaganda is dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
So are people? Do you have any faith that the faithful? Because look, you and I know what's going on, and people who are listening to this program surely know what it's about. But are the people who bought it, the folks who are viewing this stuff, do they get it?
The people who sincerely believe the lies about 2016, 2018, 2020, 2022, they're not really retrievable in most cases. But what we know is that most of the people who were promoting those lies on Fox did not believe the lies when they were telling them. It's one thing to be sincerely lost, and there are lots of people who are sincerely lost. There are lots of people who would look at me and think that I'm sincerely lost, right? Yep. And we're not able to build a bridge with one another, but we can be civil. The difference between people who believe that one another are operating with different systems of foundational universal beliefs is whether or not you're going to actually motivate those people to hurt one another or to harm one another, to dislike one another. And that's what Fox News does. You talk about the January 6th videotapes that Tucker Carlson has cherry-picked from. He had 46,000 hours of exclusive video that was provided to him several weeks ago by Speaker Kevin McCarthy, which one of my researchers actually uncovered a piece of tape from January 3rd where Tucker Carlson was holding out support against then Representative McCarthy, who was hoping to win the speakership. And what my researcher, Zach Pleat, found was that on his program on January 3rd, Tucker Carlson demanded that McCarthy release that video or he wouldn't support him for speakership. He would never get the support of the fringe, and he would never get the support of Tucker. And look who gets the exclusive. Look who gets the access to that video. Just Tucker. That was absolutely like a very straightforward quid pro quo that went a little bit under the radar at the time. But here he has 46,000 hours of footage, and the actual new footage that he was showing during his now 3 days of hour-long specials on January 6th, he showed about 4 minutes of new footage. So that's less than 0.1% of the actual video that he has. So he actually really doesn't have much exculpatory evidence at all. And of course, all of the footage he shows still shows people committing felony trespassing. None of them are supposed to be there. All of them broke through a police line. All of them are guilty of just the crime of being in the building at the wrong time. I've never been to those parts of the Capitol, and I work in DC. I've lived here for a decade. This is the people who broke into the Capitol are often not going to be reachable. They're not going to be able to be convinced. that they have been poisoned by propaganda. And that's why something like Fox News, the Drop Fox initiative, is so important, is because what we have to do is stymie the flow of that propaganda. We have to cut it off at the source. Fox is not a news organization. They do not have First Amendment protections that are afforded to the New York Times and the Washington Post and MSNBC and CNN. They don't have a news gathering operation. They're a partisan propaganda outlet, and partisan propaganda has to pay to be on air. They don't get paid to be on air. And what we're asking is for cable providers to really think about that. Right now, Fox only have, say, let's be charitable and say they have twice the audience of CNN and MSNBC. They get paid 5 or 6 times as much as CNN and MSNBC to be carried on cable packages, which means that they have a gigantic outsized amount of profit margin versus those other news gathering operations. And we see this. Fox's primetime hosts, their contributors, their guests, they get paid more than their counterparts at other networks. Fox has more money through this, just the carriage fees alone. Fox makes almost nothing from advertising. The Drops Fox initiative over the past decade has been very successful at discouraging advertisers from going on Fox. They basically just sell MyPillow ads. You might see 40% of the ads during midday on Fox News are actually ads that Fox News buys. They fill their own airtime. And then there's like a third of them that are MyPillow, and then a handful of things, catheters, vegetable-based nutritional supplements, a handful of advertisers advertise on Fox. If they didn't have those carriage fees, that network would potentially atrophy and collapse. And we're asking cable networks to think, like, do you want to be the ones supporting Fox? Fox, this poison on our democracy. Do you want to be the ones putting money in their pocket? Because you don't have to do it.
No, I'm right there with you. Now my mind is going, to the Trump endorsed catheters.
Trumpy bear catheters. It's the wave of the future. And this is this. I don't mean to steamroll here, but I'm sort of feeling myself, and so we can keep going. Fox, the Dominion lawsuit that we mentioned at the outset, the way that these sorts of lawsuits often work is, are you familiar with John Grisham? Do you ever read
I've never read one of his books, but I know who he is.
So in 1995, Matt Damon, one of his first starring roles, Matt Damon plays the lawyer in a movie called The Rainmaker. And The Rainmaker is about everyone who's listening to my voice can respect this. It's about a predatory health insurance company that's refusing to pay for the traumatic condition of one of their insurance claimants. And the claimant takes them to court, and rather than settling, they're offered a sort of petty settlement. The insurance company tries to have it dismissed, and they fail, which Fox has failed against Dominion. The insurance company offers a petty settlement, and they turn it down because this guy had grievous injuries, serious life-threatening traumatic injuries that the insurance company refused to pay. He eventually takes them to court, and they win the case in front of a jury, and they soak the insurance company. It's a gigantic number by 1995 standards. I think it's like $50 million. And it's so much money that it destroys the company financially, not because they can't afford to pay that one, but because it unlocks the dam of other suits, because it proves the concept that you can win this case. The defamation lawsuit brought by Dominion, which everyone has been following, it's been top of news for a month, it's been top of news for a year, is $1.6 billion in reputational and actual damages. The defamation lawsuit brought by Smartmatic is $2.7 billion in reputational and actual damages. If Dominion can prove that you can successfully sue Fox for defamation, the Smartmatic suit will sail, right? It will be greased skids and suddenly create a gigantic problem, because Fox is a big, powerful company, but Fox isn't Apple, right? Fox doesn't have enough cash that it could just buy Kazakhstan tomorrow, which Apple could. Fox has like $4 or $5 billion worth of cash. And if these two defamation lawsuits even come in anything close to what the claimants are asking for in injuries and punitive damages, it will soak the company, and it will open the floodgates for other things. Like, who else Fox is arguably defamed? Greta Thunberg.
No, last Friday we had Nina Jankowicz on to talk about, she's in the process of raising money to bring a suit. And, I was thinking, hey, Christine Blasey Ford, there's got to be a name that could come up from the past. Greta Thunberg, sure. There are a bunch of people that they've ridiculed, mocked, defamed, attacked, and sent the audience after that, could obviously line up and sue them for decades to come.
In 2017, Media Matters, I actually was just about to leave Media Matters and go into the campaign world at the time. But Hillary Clinton had this fascinating interview. She was being interviewed, I think it was in late 2017, and she was talking about how Fox was still obsessed with her. And at that point, she's just a retired lady. She's just a retired grandmother, right? She's not running for anything, and she's never going to run for anything again. And she's just sitting there on stage having a conversation at some symposium, some Clinton Global Initiative thing. And she goes, the way Fox News is obsessed with me, it's really starting to feel like actual malice. Actual malice is the standard in defamation. She just mentioned, she's a lawyer. She's an incredibly smart woman, a frustratingly competent woman. She mentions actual malice on stage at an event in, I think it was 2017. And all of a sudden, Fox didn't mention her name for days.
Wow.
She had been a central figment of their programming. And all of a sudden, she mentions actual malice. And the lawyers at Fox were like, do not mention this woman's name. Get her off the air. Do not talk about her. And who else they've gone after just as much? Hunter Biden, Hillary Clinton, Chelsea Clinton, the Obama family, the number of people who have been faced by the propaganda apparatus of Fox, using the veneer, using the sheep's clothing of the word news to just run political hit campaigns against normal people and against public figures. That list is longer than you and I. We could read until the sun explodes and we wouldn't get to the end of that list. And all of those people would suddenly have a real legal framework if Dominion wins. And so I'm not an optimist, right? There's no silver linings from the Trump administration. There's plenty of reason to be worried, but Fox has never been as afraid as they are now.
No,
They've
you're right.
Never been in the hot water.
If they lose, this could open the floodgates. So what do you think the chances of that are happening are? I've talked to some legal people who are saying, don't get your hopes up. This is hard to prove. I say already there's been enough damage done to Fox just by exposing through discovery all of the things that were said back and forth. I know you're not a lawyer either, but I'm sure you've talked to people who have maybe handicapped this out. What do you think the chances are?
Yeah, I think, and Media Matters is actually, we have a number of clips. If you go to our website, MediaMatters.org, you can see a number of legal experts who were interviewed on television talking about this. We have a couple of them from CNN and a couple of them from MSNBC. I think it's very easily to argue that the case of defamation has been made. The standard of actual malice has been met. The question is, what is the damage going to be? There was a time when, in a case very similar to this, against between Donald Trump and the USFL in the 1980s, or against Donald Trump and the NFL in the 1980s, a court found that the NFL had really jobbed Donald Trump and the USFL, but the court hated Trump so much that they only awarded him $1.14 in damages that I think was payable in 10-year increments, and it was totally insane. It was a deeply offensive ruling in his favor. I don't think that's where we're going to be. Right. It's not going to be an NFL versus USFL settlement. It could be less than what Dominion is searching for, though really any number would be shockingly damaging. Anything that's in the millions would be seriously problematic.
No, anything.
They don't have that kind of money.
Any decision that they have to pay out, the admission that they were wrong. Is there any way this gets settled out of court, or does this go to a decision?
Yeah, so the way that the process works now is both of them seem like they really are headed for trial. When you first bring a suit like this, Fox probably already offered a settlement that would have been it's called a no-fault settlement. Fox would have admitted, quote, no fault or injury, and they would have given an amount to settle the case with the claimant. But if you think about this, Dominion Voting Systems is now synonymous with the word election fraud. Dominion Voting System makes election voting machines. They make electronic voting machines, and they design software for electronic voting machines. So does Smartmatic. And these companies, this is their core business. This is what they do. Yeah. And they are now synonymous with fraud, right? Dominion will never get a contract in Alabama ever again. No. Dominion will never get a contract in Arkansas, Kansas, Texas, even in swing states, purple states. Is Tony Evers gonna? Yep. No, is he going to be willing to sign a contract with Dominion? All of a sudden, they're poisonous in. We will see where it goes. States. We'll see.
Craig, gotta go. Appreciate the time, man. Great stuff. Thanks so much.
Thank you for your time, Rick.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1968. That was the day that farm labor activist Cesar Chavez broke a 25-day fast. He fasted as a sign of commitment to nonviolence during the struggle for farm workers in Delano, California, to gain fair wages and safe working conditions. During the fast, he only drank water. He broke the fast with a ceremonial mass in Delano. Presidential candidate Robert Kennedy was in attendance. At the Mass, Chavez was too weak to give a speech, so he gave his written words to Reverend James Drake to share with those in attendance. He wrote, "We are gathered here today not so much to observe the end of the fast, but because we are a family bound together in common struggle for justice. We are a union family celebrating our unity and the nonviolent nature of our movement. The fast has had different meanings for different people. Some of you may still wonder about its meaning and importance. It was not intended as a pressure against any growers. For that reason, we have suspended negotiations and arbitration proceedings and relaxed the militant picketing and boycotting of the strike during this period. I undertook the fast because my heart was filled with grief and pain for the suffering of the farm workers. The fast was first for me and then for all of us in this union. It was a fast for nonviolence and a call for sacrifice." Chavez engaged in 2 more long fasts during his life as an activist. He fasted in 1972 for 24 days. And in 1988, at the age of 61, he fasted for 36 days to highlight the harmful effects of pesticides on farm workers and their children. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Many of today's right-wing governors and state legislators have a problem by constantly pushing an extremist ideological agenda of nonsense about nutty conspiracy theories while imposing autocratic laws to ban everything from voting to library books. They've become widely ridiculed as some combo of kooky, clownish, and embarrassingly incompetent. That's why it's significant that Missouri's GOP lawmakers have not only recognized their image problem, but have actually made an effort to demonstrate that they are serious-minded public officials concerned about their professionalism. Namely, the State House of Representatives has adopted a dress code. Seriously. Specifically, the attire mandate addresses the pressing state issue of female lawmakers who come to work dressed normally but without jackets. Disapproving legislative leaders clucked that this fashion faux pas was undermining the public's respect for them. But now, says GOP Representative Ann Kelly, sponsor of the new code, quote, "It has been fixed." Henceforth, all women legislators in the Show Me state must wear blazers or cardigans in order to, as Kelly explained, always maintain a formal and professional atmosphere in the House. Professional? Excuse me, but these far-right state legislatures totter between being goofy policy forums and carnival sideshows. The only proper attire for many of these so-called legislative leaders would be straitjackets. One lawmaker even claimed that the code was about protecting freedom. The clothing mandate, she explained, eliminates the possibility that the state will be the clothing police. This is Jim Hightower saying, "I'm thinking of moving to Missouri. It must be wonderful to live in a state where the government has already fixed all the big problems people really care about, letting the legislative body focus on properly clothing its women members."
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So again, some really interesting stuff and some good stuff coming out of the president's budget, and some recent announcements about, making workers' lives better, and federal workers going to get a bump according to the most recent report. President Biden, I guess, has thrown out the idea of a 5.2% raise for federal employees. Now, I don't think I don't know that this is quite enough, but it's better than what they've gotten. I guess they're saying it's the highest increase, the largest increase since the Carter administration. But again, this is one of those moments. You've had things held off for so long, the perfect storm of this massive inflation. We'll find out if this is enough. And here to share some thoughts on If this is good, if this is a good starting point, if this is, well, not so great, I've asked Daniel Horowitz to come talk with us. Daniel's the Deputy Director of Legislative Affairs there at the American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE. Daniel, thanks for taking time for us.
My pleasure. Good to be here.
So the president's got this, I guess this is the number 5.2%, right?
Yeah, that's what it's in his budget that he released yesterday. And it's definitely a step in the right direction. But to our way of thinking, it doesn't go far enough. And really, what we need to be doing is closing the tremendous pay gap that's opened up between the federal and the private sector. So we're going to keep pushing for a higher rate than the president has proposed, although we're very appreciative of the step he's taken.
And how big is that gap? I saw something, your President Everett Kelly came out and said that, federal salaries are 23% lower on average than people equally qualified in the private sector. Is that an accurate number? That seems enormous.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the case. It's a very large gap. And it tends to be widening all the time because those federal pay increases are not keeping pace with the private sector, particularly in the inflationary times we live in. It is the largest increase in several decades, what President Biden has proposed, but you have to remember that inflation is running higher than it has in a number of decades. So the number may seem high in these difficult budgetary times, but look at what's happened with inflation in just the last couple of years has run up about 13%.
I can hear my conservative friends losing their mind, though, Daniel. Look, those lazy government workers getting this huge raise. I didn't get this raise. You can already hear it, can't you?
Well, there's always some of that in the background, but I think it helps to think, who are these government workers who are demonized all the time? Well, they're the transportation security officers who protect us all in the airports. Starting pay for a TSO, and it's slated to go up now some, fortunately, but it's been around $30,000. It's barely above the minimum wage. It's close to the poverty line in many cases for a family. Food safety inspectors, we're all dependent on them for the safety of our meat products and produce and so on. Their pay isn't much different either. These are extremely stressful jobs. We're all dependent on them for our very lives. And let me tell you something else. These people are not out there teleworking. They were working straight through the pandemic every single day. And I don't think people worried too much, didn't have to worry that the food they were eating during those times wasn't safe. So there's a lot that we depend on these workers for, who are unseen, and I think it's only fair that something be done to at least keep their pay as close as possible to inflation.
Yeah, at least to be able to, I don't know, keep a roof over your head, food on the table, not having to have the kids go to school to beg for free lunches. I don't know, just basic dignity sounds reasonable to me. Now, you brought up a number of professions, and I've got friends who work in the Bureau of Prisons, and some of the conditions there are not great. The wages, same thing. All of these jobs. And I think we forget about this because things just seem to work. No matter what administration's in and how bad or how good they may be, people just keep showing up to the jobs, even with all the attacks. And I can't, this is, again, one of these things where, I look at public school teachers. I don't know how or why they get up every day and do what they do, but thank goodness that they do. Same thing for the folks that you represent. I don't know how you put up with all the attacks and all the nonsense that we get from political leaders and cable news, and I don't know how you do it, but thank goodness they do.
Well, absolutely, and it's prison guards, as you say, it's border patrol. A lot of politicians wring their hands over conditions at the border. Well, how much worse might things be if we didn't have our border patrol working there every day? Again, they're not teleworking. They work throughout the pandemic. And we need to do everything we can to retain people in the government who are the best people that we can recruit. And look at our VA, for example. There are tens of thousands of vacant jobs in VA. These are doctors and nurses and clinicians who care for our veterans. And we can't fill those jobs. And in large measure, it's working conditions, and it's the pay is not competitive. So across the board, we need to be closing that pay gap between the public sector and the private sector.
Yeah.
That's the key to the long-term health of the government and really to our democracy when you think about everything that the federal government does.
But when you have people, Daniel, who say, government can't, shouldn't, or won't, or, it's all bad. When you've got people who don't believe in government, then in charge of your pay scales and your working conditions and the things that are important to working people, are we surprised that things aren't great?
I'm always a little surprised and disappointed, I guess. But I think, and it may not be all that apparent to people who are just watching cable news and seeing all the conflict, but we are making progress in some important areas. And one area is in competitive hiring.
Right.
We talk a lot about pay, and pay is certainly important. Pay is the key to keeping the best people in the government. But we also have to have good procedures in place for hiring people at the front end. And if you go back to the 19th century, we had a patronage system. And every time the president changed, he would bring in all of his buddies and fill up the agencies. And that was the patronage system. And then 4 years, it would change over again. Well, it became apparent even to the leaders of the day that you couldn't have a modern state if you didn't have a professional, knowledgeable civil service. So started a system of an apolitical civil service exams, professionalizing this whole group. So, that was how we got people landed on the moon. That was how we won World War II. That was how we got out of the Great Depression, was through the professional civil service. But if you look at what's happening now, that's been seriously eroded, and it's not just the pay, but it's how hiring has been eroded, and people have adopted what's called direct hiring, which is shorthand for just hiring their friends and slotting them into the civil service. So we need to undo all of that.
Yeah.
And there is bipartisan progress there. We have something called the Chance to Compete Act. It's making its way through Congress on a bipartisan basis, and it seeks to revive these competitive hiring procedures that have served us so well over the 20th century and really need to be brought back and reinforced.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring this up because there was a story not too long ago. Former President Trump, evidently, some of his insiders are floating this trial balloon of something called Schedule F, I guess, is what they're saying. Well, they're planning on, if he's reelected, to fire thousands of civil servants, thousands of government employees, and to return to that kind of patronage system to where you got to be loyal, you got to kiss the ring. And look, I don't want that. I don't want Trump to be able to do that. I don't want Biden to be able to do that. I don't want any president to be able to go, we're going to bring in all of our people and they're going to be loyal to me instead of the American people, the taxpayers who they work for. It seems what you laid out, the history of how we got here, should be front and center and pretty important for people to think about.
Absolutely. Well, we've just come through this pandemic, and obviously people have lots of opinions about the public health effort and how it did well, how it didn't do so well. But how much worse would it be if all of those doctors and virologists were hired simply based on party loyalty rather than their professional credentials? So we really have to get back as much as possible to the merit-based service, and not just former President Trump, but Governor DeSantis and other people who aspire to be president have expressed interest in this concept of Schedule F, which is really patronage on a grand scale. They would simply declare that large swaths of the civil service are policy-making jobs. Not only they can be hired anybody they want, but they just fire them if they're disloyal without any sort of due process. So this would be a huge departure from 100+ years of what's made this country work.
No, it's crazy where we're heading. And this Chance to Compete Act, I mean, how would this be different from the civil service exam now, or would it not change that? I get what you're saying. We want merit-based hiring systems. How would this change how things are happening now that would be recognizable to the outsider?
I think anybody who's gone on USA Jobs and tried to fill out a job application realizes what the shortcomings are. A lot of it's based on self-assessment. So if you lie about your qualifications or you exaggerate, which I think most people are prone to do, you may well get a job ahead of somebody who's actually qualified. Well, all this law is saying is let's do some form of objective assessment. Let the government define what are the skills it needs. Let's have an objective assessment by someone who has expertise, and then have a passing requirement, determine who's qualified. But once you're qualified, the positive aspect of this is you'd be eligible for jobs across the government. So instead of repeatedly going through this frustrating process, getting nowhere, you could apply once, your qualifications could be determined, and you'd be eligible for a lot of jobs. And when we're trying to compete against the private sector, those sorts of streamlining measures are really what's important.
You listen to the Rick Smith Show with Daniel Horowitz, Deputy Director of the Legislative Department at AFGE, afge.org, their website, if you want to take a look at that. I got to get your thoughts on this thing this week with Lauren Boebert. I'm sure you saw the Colorado representative questioning the head of the Office of Personnel Management, the OPM director, during a committee of the Oversight and Accountability Committee. And she got a leaked document, Daniel. There's a super secret leaked document that said, a quarter of your members, a quarter of federal employees, they're not logging in. When they're doing that telework, they're just gone, disappearing. In fact, on vacation, logging in maybe somewhere when they're on vacation. I did find it was interesting that the OPM woman did put her in her place, but it's this kind of cherry picking of information that I find kind of dangerous for your members. I wanted to give you a chance to address that.
Well, I was there in the hearing room when those comments were made, and I feel they were rebutted right on the spot. First of all, I didn't see the document, but it appears she was waving up something from during the Trump administration, so that was kind of humorous in itself. But if you think about the diversity of federal jobs, as we talked about, food safety inspectors, there are park rangers, there are border patrol agents. Do you really expect these people to be logged into a computer 8 hours a day or out doing their jobs? There was really, I think, nothing to her remarks, but these are extreme attacks. I think people understand that people in agencies are working hard. Obviously, there are opportunities for improvement, and our people are committed to working with their agencies to improve customer service, continue to dig out from the pandemic wherever possible.
Yeah, but the reason I bring this up is because you've got people in government who are looking at federal employees who can't really defend themselves as, basically just whipping boys or piñatas that they can attack. And you're right. The woman did push back and say, look, those are Trump era numbers if they're accurate at all. But still, it's still saying that a quarter of the federal employees didn't log in. And this is where having people on these committees who have agendas that are about attacking federal workers as opposed to how to get the best workers is kind of interesting to me.
Yeah, I think there are a number of ways of looking at the problem. First of all, get some actual data. Bringing out some shadowy document from several years ago and saying it's an important leak doesn't really serve anybody.
Right.
Gather some actual data. Second point I would make is our union, other public sector unions, support high performance. We have all kinds of measures to get people the training and the tools and the environment they need to succeed at work. And that ought to be the goal of everybody, including elected officials. So I think these sorts of partisan attacks should be put off to one side, and people should all focus on how do we get the most effective civil service we can possibly have.
Which brings me to the Show Up Act that's going on, because evidently there are a bunch of people who don't want federal employees working from home, even though what we've found from some of the studies that are out there is, people who are working from home actually are happier, actually are more productive. Who knew when you would have happy employees that they would be more productive? But this move now to get everybody back into the workplace, regardless of if it's right, wrong, good, bad, this seems to me to be the kind of vein that this kind of stuff is going through. We're going to make up attacks, whether they're accurate or not, just to prove the point that we need to get people back into the office. So I'm looking at this Show Up Act, and I'm first curious, where are you guys on this? And secondly, we as working people, we should be fighting to make our conditions better, make ourselves more productive when we're happier. And this seems like, something that has made people happier.
Yeah, well, I have quite a bit to say about the Show Up Act. The union is not in favor of this legislation. We're in favor of some portions of it that seek to collect more data from agencies about telework. What are the benefits? What are the downsides? And let's look at that. There's nothing to object to there. But what this bill does that's very destructive is just reset the clock to before the pandemic and say every agency has to reset their telework arrangements back to 2019. Well, the world has changed a lot since 2019, and there are a couple of points I would make. First of all, more than half of our members were never teleworking at all, even when a lot of white-collar jobs particularly were teleworking for years in the private sector. So our members, because of the vital nature of their work in law enforcement, transportation security, food safety, were never teleworking. The second point is we're competing constantly with the private sector, and telework is here to stay in the private sector. So if we're not offering a comparable benefit where it's appropriate,
right,
we're not going to be able to hire people. And I'll give you a very concrete example that we've learned about, and this is within the VA. Well, so many of our veterans have mental health difficulties and are seeking treatment. We have a tremendous problem with veteran suicide, as you know. And the VA is working to combat this. Well, there are not enough VA psychologists, mental health professionals, and there's not enough space to see all the veterans who want care. Veterans want this care through telehealth when they can, and the only way to get it to them is by recruiting VA psychologists working from home or remotely who can go through a whole series of appointments, one after the other, during the day. There isn't space in VA medical centers to even fit these people. Yeah. So if we were to reset the clock on telework, we would be literally telling potentially suicidal veterans that they could not get care in order to serve someone's political agenda. Well, that just isn't right.
I'm right there with you. And I'm against the Show Up Act as well. Another piece of legislation I got to get to before I let you go, this social media censorship bill that's out there, basically banning TikTok from the federal government. I'm not a TikTok fan. Something has to be done. The algorithm there is horrible, especially for our young people. But I'm curious your thought on this legislation, whether it's good, bad, if there's a better way to skin this cat. Your thoughts?
Well, beyond the TikTok issue, which is working its way through Congress, in terms of whether this is a security threat and should it be on federal devices, all of that, there's that issue. But there's also a broader issue working its way through the House, which is what they call censorship of social media as a whole. And, I'm sure your viewers will have heard of Hunter Biden's infamous laptop and the great threat it is to our republic. Well, some of our Republican friends think that Twitter delayed publication of information in 2020 about the Hunter Biden laptop. And again, this happened during the Trump administration. So don't blame Biden for this, but because of that delay, some folks now want to take it out of the hide of federal workers and actually punish them, fine them, and fire them, in some cases up to $50,000 fines, if they tell social media companies about inaccurate stories or even foreign misinformation from Putin or from China that they may be carrying on their sites. So this is another misguided effort just to bash the civil service, when what we should be doing is making the government a positive employer and trying to get the best people in it.
It does come back to that, doesn't it? Daniel, I appreciate the time. I'd love to have you come back again and share some more thoughts. Keep up the great work.
Anytime, Rick. Nice to be here.
Good stuff. Daniel Horowitz, he is the Deputy Director of Legislative Affairs there at the American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE, afge.org, their website, if you want to take a look at what they do. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1941. New Yorkers woke up to find a foot of snow blanketing their city. Nearly 1 million New Yorkers also discovered their usual routine was going to be disrupted. At 5 a.m., the Transport Workers Union had walked off the job, calling a strike against the Fifth Avenue Coach and New York City omnibus companies. The bus drivers' demands included a pay increase and an 8-hour workday. Many of the company's 3,500 employees were forced to work 60 hours or more a week. Michael Quill, the TWU president, led the strike. Quill was an Irish immigrant known for his energetic union leadership. The bus companies tried to turn public opinion against the strikers. They took out ads in the New York newspapers reading, "If you had to walk to work today, blame the Transit Workers Union." Other ads attempted to stir up anger by calling the union a communist-dominated, Moscow-directed outfit. Despite these tactics, thousands of other union workers across the city joined the bus drivers on the picket lines. Perhaps the most iconic moment of the strike came on St. Patrick's Day. The union had been denied a permit to join the city's annual parade. Undeterred, hundreds of union members donned TWU armbands and jaunty bus driver caps and marched anyway. The strike lasted for 12 days. Mayor LaGuardia sided with the company and urged the union to settle the strike. The union agreed to bring their negotiations to the New York State Mediation Board, where they won some ground on their demands, including a 9-hour workday. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2. I tell you, I like this story. Evidently, our Department of Homeland Security keeping our borders safe. Evidently, there were some Canadian workers coming down from the Great White North to break a union strike down in Southern California. Medieval times. They were sending a couple of knights, a third medieval times worker down to, they're on strike. Going to scab on those workers here in the U.S., and the Department of Homeland Security turned them away because they lacked the proper visas. Look, it's amazing what corporate America will do to try and deny workers the ability to form unions and get better wages, hours, and conditions. So, good on them. And finally, I want to finish off with what I think is a couple of good stories real quick. New Hampshire, a Republican state representative, Jeffrey Greason. Evidently, Jeff wasn't happy with the plow driver who was plowing snow in front of his driveway and, went off on a really, really angry, profane rant against the plow driver. He has been arrested, charged with disorderly conduct and criminal threatening, and good on him. What I find interesting is his office released a statement saying, both sides have reached an agreement, to calm things down. No, you should be going to jail for that rant. And look, plow drivers, those are the folks who are out there, busting their behinds, working, 15, 18, 20 hours so the roads can be open, and you're going to do no. And finally, a federal judge has ordered Peter Navarro. Remember Peter Navarro, the Trumpkey? They've ordered him to give the National Archives 200 to 250 of his emails that he sent during the Trump administration in an official capacity from what? What you say? What is that? A private email account? But her emails, but Hillary's emails. We're the chance to lock him up. But her emails. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you miss any portion of the program, grab the podcast. Thanks for being here. We'll see you back here next time. But her emails.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.